Okay, we are back to another part in this series with Ray Dalio and the Changing World Order. This time we're going to go over the changing value of money. And this is continuing where we left off with the whole long-term debt cycle and how money plays into that. If you remember, the theme of this whole story of the human race and how we use money is that we're just always running away from our problems. We just like building up a bunch of debt, seeing everything collapse, and then starting it all over again. That's why, as we say, human nature doesn't change, which is another reason why markets really don't change either. But you're going to see this same process play out in this video, except in more detail. We're going to look specifically at money and how it changes. And remember, this is all very long-term focused stuff. I actually don't agree with Dalio with the way that he talks about it, as if it's right around the corner. If you want to do something good for your finances right now, then definitely check out our free training where we go over the strategy that we use right now, today, tomorrow, next week, and the week after that. There's a link in this video and down below in the description and comments. Same strategy I myself use and all our fallible members. It is really the best way to invest in the market, and it's really what you need to do right now versus what we're going to talk about here, which is very long term. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. So in this article, like I said, it's the changing value of money. So we're going to look at the big devaluations and the end of the reserve currency periods. And you remember how important it is for a country to have the reserve currency because it gives them so much power. Like the US has the reserve currency right now, which gives us the ability to print our way out of most problems. And us doing that has a huge effect on the rest of the world because everything is pegged off the US dollar. So as explained in the previous videos, there's a real economy and then there's a financial economy. They're intertwined, but they are different. They each have their own supply and demand dynamics. So right now what we're talking about is the financial economy because we're talking specifically about money. So remember, we're always following the long-term debt cycle, right? So we get ourselves in trouble with way too much debt over a generation, and then printing and devaluing the currency becomes the easiest way out of that trouble. The reality is that all currencies devalue or die. And when they do, the cash or bonds that are held in that currency are devalued or wiped out as well. So Dalio talks a lot in this article about how we all feel so safe holding on to our cash, but we shouldn't because everything gets devalued and it dies. Again, like I said, I don't agree with the time frame that he talks about here, but just remember, this is the long term. Well, the reason that it is true that they all devalue and die is because printing a lot of a currency and devaluing the debt is the easiest way to reduce those debt burdens, easiest way to get rid of the debt. So really, when you look at it from a broad perspective, there's 4 levers that policymakers can use to fix their debt problems. One is austerity, which is spending less. Another is debt defaults and restructurings. A third are transfers of money and credit from those who have more to those who have less, so basically raising taxes. And then the easiest one is printing money and devaluing everything. So austerity is first of all deflationary because you're reducing spending, so it really hurts the economy, prices drop, it's not a good look. And it doesn't actually last long because it's too painful. Who likes cutting down? How many people can actually afford to cut down on their spending? It doesn't actually work, especially when we're far into a long-term debt cycle where everyone, they can't control their spending. That's why we got here in the first place. Now, the second option, the debt defaults and restructurings, those are also deflationary and they're painful because when you wipe out a debt, what are you doing? You're also wiping out someone's asset because they own that debt, right? Someone was supposed to pay them. If you just cut it up, well, then the guy who was supposed to be owed money just kind of gets screwed. This process is painful for the creditor who loses their wealth because the debt gets cut up, but also for the debtor because he goes broke and his assets are taken away. Everyone kind of loses in that situation. Now, the third option, the transfers of money and credit from those who have it, basically from the rich to the poor, redistribution, well, that is more politically challenging, but it's better than the other two. And you'll kind of see now with this election and over the next few decades, actually, regardless of who even wins this next election, the trend is going to be towards higher taxes and more redistribution because the wealth gap has just expanded more and more. The big reason being because of the central banks propping up these markets for so long so that the rich get richer and the poor just get screwed. Well, when you get a bunch of angry people who haven't been able to benefit from the market like everyone else, they're going to vote in more people like, say, a Bernie Sanders, who's going to redistribute everything. And like I said, it's not going to happen this time, but eventually that's where the trend is going. And the reason why is because we are at the end of the long-term debt cycle. So we're living through it right now. It's already happening. And the other thing that's happening that we all see is the printing of the money, the stimulus. Government is giving out money left and right. Well, what? Those talks didn't actually get through this time, but they'll eventually get through. Like we're going to explain in this article, there's no way around around it. Stimulus is going to keep coming. So this is the fastest and the least well understood, but the most common way of restructuring debts. This is the playbook that happens forever with every civilization. And everyone pretty much likes it because everyone likes stimulus, right? Free money. And it's tough to identify any harmed parties. It's much easier to do than say, hey, let's raise these taxes and take this money from the rich people and give it out. Instead, let's just give money to everyone, and by printing more and more, the currency gets devalued, but no one really notices. And in most cases, assets like the stock market go up as that currency depreciates. And people don't realize because they measure their wealth in those assets versus the currency. So everyone feels like they're getting richer. That's why this is such a popular method, and it's what we default to all the time. You are seeing these things happen now. You're seeing the large amounts of money get sent out everywhere. And I think we're about to see the redistribution as well. Now, as we were saying, most people don't pay attention to currency risk. I mean, people who love to say that the dollar is getting destroyed, yeah, they pay attention to it. But most are just worried about whether their assets are going up or down in value. For example, right now, are you worried about the currency declining, or are you worried about your stocks going up or down? Most likely you're worried about your stocks. So what you got to remember is that all currencies have been devalued or died. Of the roughly 750 currencies that have existed since 1700, only about 20% remain. And of those that remain, all have been devalued. That's just the way it goes. So for example, in 1850, in what is now Germany, you would have used the Gulden or the Thaler. I don't know if that's how you say it. And then in Japan, you would have used the Koban or the Rio. Italy, you would have used one of 6 possible currencies. There were so many different currencies, and most of them have been wiped out. And in most cases, they were wiped out when these countries had hyperinflation or they lost wars and had large war debts. And you'll see in a second, a lot of this happens around the world wars. So what are the currencies devaluing against? Well, the most important thing is for them to devalue against debt, because the goal of printing money is to reduce debt burdens. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. Debt is a promise to deliver money, so giving more money to those who need it lessens the debt burden. But obviously, if you're giving money to everybody, then the value of that money goes down. And that's what he's saying here. Increases in the supply of money and credit both reduce the value of money and credit, which hurts the holders of it, and relieves debt burdens. So when all that printing with the money and credit goes into productivity and profits for companies, then stock prices go up. And at the same time, people start getting rid of cash because it gets devalued, and they put it into more of these assets like stocks, or they move it into inflation hedging assets and other currencies, all to protect the value of it. So all that flooding out of that currency again devalues it more. Because at the end of the day, when you think about a currency, you got to think about it just as another asset, like a stock, a house, anything. If there's a lot of demand for that currency, the value of it is going to go up. If there's a little demand for it, the value is going to go down. So think about it like $1. If the currency is really strong, maybe they're bidding 10 euros for $1. But if the currency is really weak, then they're only willing to pay 2 euros for $1. And I know that doesn't fit with what the currency exchange is right now, but I'm just saying. So these devaluations, we're going to look at them in relation to gold, because gold has been a timeless and universal alternative currency. It's always been around and it's kept its value. So the chart below shows the spot currency returns of 3 major reserve currencies in relation to gold since 1600. So you can see right here, all 3 of these reserve currencies have pretty much collapsed, at least from where they used to be. This is the US, the dollar, Great Britain, so like the pound and what it was before, and then the Dutch currency as that kept changing. So devaluations typically occur as abrupt declines during debt crises. So it's not like a steady decline as we're going to see in this next chart. It's kind of like a drop and then some stability and then another drop. So you see that right here. This is a chart comparing different currencies to gold. So they'll be okay for a while, then they'll have a major drop. So for like this blue line, this is the US. Okay for a while, major drop, have decades of stability, and then another major drop. That's just the life cycle of every currency, as you can see here. So again, the big devaluations are more episodic than evolutionary, meaning they happen with certain events. There were 6 time frames that were really big devaluations of major currencies, though there were plenty of minor currencies over the last 170 years too. In the 1860s, the large financing needs of the Civil War prompted the US to suspend gold convertibility and to print money to help monetize their war debts. And that printed money were known as the greenbacks. Then after that, the US returned to its prior gold peg in the mid-1870s, and a number of other countries around the world joined the gold standard too. So everyone was pegging against gold. Then came World War I. So by the way, the Civil War devaluation, that was right here. And then as I said, World War I, where countries ran enormous deficits for funding the war. And during that time, gold was the international money used because there was a lack of trust between different currencies and countries, of course. And after the war ended, a new monetary order was created with gold and the winning country's currencies tied to it, the center of the new monetary order. So these wars become very important for the financial economy as well. So you can see here, you can barely see it, but World War I, there was a big dip too. Then we had the roaring 20s and then the bust that led us into the 1930 through 45 period, where again, central banks had to print money and then there was more war. And you can see that another big devaluation that happened with all of this. And then in 1971, we got off the gold standard because we were spending and creating debt and we just needed to print more. And there was way too many claims and too little gold to keep using it. So we moved to a full fiat monetary system. Dollars are just tied to our trust in the country, really. Once again, you see that huge drop here in the 70s. And that happened because we got off the gold standard. Now, since 2000, the currencies have continued to devalue, but because we now have a free floating monetary system, there have not been huge drops. Not as much, not like abrupt breaks like when we got off the gold standard. It's more a gradual and continuous devaluation as we continue to print, go into negative interest rates, all this good stuff that we're doing right now. So once again, you can see in this chart, it's not as sudden, but it's continuing to decline. Now, currencies devaluing and currencies losing their reserve currency position aren't the same thing. They can be caused by the same thing, but they happen at different times. Currencies eventually use their reserve status after chronic and large devaluations. So typically leading up to a country losing its reserve status is there's already an established loss of economic and political primacy to a rising rival that creates a vulnerability. So for example, in the past, it was the Dutch falling behind the UK or the UK falling behind the US. And then 2, you get large and growing debts that are monetized by the central bank printing money and buying government debt, leading to 3, a weakening of the currency and a self-reinforcing run from the currency that can't be stopped because the fiscal imbalance of payments deficits are too great for cutbacks to close. So there's a lot of hinting here, and it's not just hinting, Dalio straight up says it, that the dollar is going to lose its reserve currency status and China is going to take over. That's what Dalio believes, which is why we make fun of him for sucking up to the CCP so much right now. Now, we're not as smart as Ray Dalio, but we're also not biased like him, and based off our research, the US is a long way away from losing our reserve currency status, especially with the house of cards that China is building. Yeah, they seem all powerful, but they are very fragile, and a big part of that fragility comes from the way that they treat their people. I mean, they're trying to stamp out whole religions and cultures right now, right? Their latest project after screwing over the Uyghurs is now going after Mongolians. I was just reading this article about how they're censoring this museum in Europe for their Genghis Khan exhibit because they don't want the name Genghis Khan used, and they don't even want the Mongolian name used. So they're literally trying to stamp out portions of people and their history. It's nuts. And then all the censorship, and then all the debt, and the whole command economy thing, which doesn't work long term. Lots of reasons why we think China is not going to make it. And it would be nice if us in the US and around the world turned on the CCP, kind of speed up the process of them falling apart. But anyway, we think that the US is in a good spot with their reserve currency and our reserve status, at least for now. Like Dalio says, it's not going to last forever, but we also don't agree with Dalio that it's going to happen very soon and that China is going to win out. Dalio has a lot of business over in China and he has very close ties to the country, so he seems very biased. But either way, the overarching themes are good and we're going to continue to cover them. So definitely subscribe to this channel if you want to see that. And don't forget, even what Dalio is talking about in his timeline is still long term. But if you're trying to improve your investments right now and improve your profits in the market, even in dollars, which you can convert into something else, when you have more dollars, you'll have more of that something else as well, then definitely check out our training. It's a free training that'll teach you the same strategy I use and all our Fallible members as well. There's a link in this video and down below in the description and comments. It's a great way to grow those dollars before China completely takes over. So take the training, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Stay fallible out there. Bye.